Hey, this is the highlight scripture. James chapter 1, verse 22, it says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says." Hey, I'm glad you here because I'm here for you, and this is the Manvotional. Now, look, let me give you some cultural context. The book of James may have been written to two distinctly different audiences, which would have varied from their cultural worldviews. For instance, if the audience would have been primarily Hebrew, they would have likely been influenced by the Judaizers. If the audience would have been primarily Greek, they would have most likely been influenced by the Gnostics. However, both would agree that in this statement that without this particular knowledge, your salvation would not be complete, because their knowledge, their information was so critical that Jesus alone would not been efficient enough to complete one's salvation. So this is what the Judaizers would have theorized. They would have said, without the Talmud, without the Levitical law, without the information of these particular books, then your faith is dead. And the Gnostics would have said, without the information, without the knowledge of the hidden teachings and the secret letters, your faith is dead. And in response, James says, without works, your faith is dead. See, James says, y'all so caught up on knowledge that you missing out on the work. So when he says, do not merely be listeners and deceive yourself, he says you're deceiving yourself because you're not focused on the work. And he says, when you believe in the Messiah, Jesus Christ, when you believe in him, then he says, I promise good works will come out of you, because he's the one who does the works. It's not our works, it's Christ working through us. And he says, when you have faith in him, he has to respond through his works coming out of you. He says, but these guys were getting so captivated into responding that they never got in a place of applying it. So it says the deception is that you're saying you're listening, but you're only listening to respond. You're not listening to apply. And we as men can get caught up in that as well. And that is where the sin of pride comes in. Matter of fact, James also says in the same chapter, he says, rid yourself of those sins that so easily ensnare one. What is that sin that so easily ensnares us? It is the sin of pride. And what was happening is these guys was coming to the congregation with this information, with this secret knowledge that they wanted to add to these people. But really, their problem was their pride. But they was coming to enlighten the congregation. They was coming to teach when they should have been coming to learn. And in order to do that, the scripture says you have to humbly accept the very word that was planted in your spirit. And when you humbly accept that word, then you're able to apply the word. But these guys couldn't apply the word because the humility wasn't there. So I want you to evaluate yourself and say, man, is my humility there? Because without humbly accepting the word, you cannot apply the word. And that's what was getting into these guys' heads. But the problem was they was getting puffed up, because the knowledge, the scriptural knowledge, is going to do one or two things. The knowledge of the word is either going to place you in a place of humility, or the knowledge of the word is going to place you in a place of pride. And what these guys what was taking place with these men is that they was becoming prideful. Like, say for instance, you can learn a word and it doesn't always bring humility, because you start adding to the word. Like, say for instance, your guy David Koresh, he knew the word backwards and forward. He can recite vast amounts of scripture, but that effort started to puff him up so much that he started to add. And a lot of times when we get in trouble as men, we add things that comes from our emotions. And our emotion says, well, this was this and that was that, and that person was wrong. But that's what you feel. You get what I'm saying? That ain't what the word say. And in order to humble yourself, you got to say, well, what does the word say? Not what my feelings say, not what my thoughts say, but what does that word say? And as a man, you got to be willing to be held accountable to what the word says, not your thoughts, not your background, not your history, not your influence, but what that word says, man. Listen, man, my question for you all is, what does it look like to be humbled by scripture? When is a time that you was humbled by that scripture, where you thought you knew something and you found out that you was wrong? Or what's the time that you was prideful with scripture, where you had the information, and because you had that information, you became haughty? Well, man, I'm glad y'all was able to listen to me, man. Thanks for being a part of the team.